Let's begin now with Lewis's The Four Loves. And remember that we've been talking about the likings and loves for the subhuman, what he calls epithumia. So that could be, for example, I love chocolate, that sort of a thing. And yes, when I was told I couldn't love chocolate, I knew I could. Not in the same way you love people, but you love the stuff. And there's a word for it that the Greeks have. It's a richer language than ours. And so it also could be likings and loves for music. It could be for art, for nature, all of that. There's a vast realm of loves, of desires, of the sight and the sound and the smell and all the other senses. What we have is epithumia, but then the second one we looked at was a love of storge, S-T-O-R-G-E, hearty, and it's a love of affection. And we saw that the wonders of storge also are accompanied by downfalls, downsides, that each of these human loves is a seedbed of its own unique forms of hatred if it's not elevated by the fifth love, what I call the fifth love, but really what he calls the fourth, but it's the love of agape. Unless the divine love infuses the human loves, they can be the seeds of their own unique forms of hatred. And we looked at this with regard to the gift and the need love of affection. Now we're going to be moving from storge to phileo, or philea. And it's the love of friendship. And I want to make several comments about that because you see very few modern people think friendship, as he writes, is a love of comparable value or of a love at all when you compare it with eros or with storge, with affection or romantic love. And he says to the ancients, friendship seemed the happiest and most fully human of all loves, the crown of life and the school of virtue. The modern world, in comparison, ignores it. And his reason for this is that he thinks that the most obvious answer for that is that few value it because few experience it. And I think he's right. I think one of the most countercultural things you can do in this culture especially is to have a rich and abiding friendship of the true nature that we're going to be describing. It's very, very rare and increasingly rare in an increasingly alienated and lonely culture, being amplified, that alienation, by various technologies. Friendship, as he says, is, in a sense, not at all derogatory, the least natural of loves, the least instinctive, organic, biological, gregarious, and necessary, you see. He says, without Eros, none of us would have been begotten, and without affection, none of us would have been reared. But we can live and breed without friendship. So it's an interesting analysis that he did. He's about 62 years old when he does this work. It's later in his life. He'd lived to 65. And he's really reflecting on a life of his own experiences you're going to be seeing. Him describing a beautiful description of what I saw Lewis loving in friendship. And I could see, and I would love to have been a part of that circle. One day, however, I'll get a chance to have an interaction with him, which will be very good. But in friendship, is that luminous, tranquil, rational world of relationships freely chosen. Because in a storge affection, you don't choose the ones that you love. It's a different thing. These are freely chosen relationships. This alone, of all the loves, seemed to raise you to the level of gods or angels. And then came romanticism and the exaltation of instinct and the increasingly silly notions that he feels that he has to rebut. This is around 1960. It imposes on me at the outset, a very tiresome bit of demolition. It has actually become necessary in our time to rebut this theory that every firm and serious friendship is really homosexual. It's an interesting thought. You see, and what the idea, like David-Jonathan relationship and so forth, and it's a reductionism, and it's reducing this love and conflating it with eros, and it's not the same love at all. The way that they use it, those who cannot conceive friendship as a substantive love, but only as a disguise or elaboration of eros, betray the fact that they have never had a friend. I think that's what we're looking at here. They don't even know what they're talking about, so they have to reduce it to something that is a substitute for another. It's a diminishment. And of course, as we do that, our understanding of the world is diminished if we don't have a top-down perspective. When you have a bottom-up perspective, that is to say reductionism, then everything is reduced to instinct or whatever it happens to be, libido or whatever. But if you have a top-down vision, then you realize the truth that you are actually spiritual beings having this earthbound experience. So it's whether you're going to look at life from a top-down perspective, where the higher levels can explain and understand the lower, or whether you're going to have a bottom-up perspective where everything is nothing but this, and so it's reduced to the lowest common denominator. And so a biblical vision is top-down and inside-out. It sees it that way. He goes on to speak about love in this way, and friendship. Lovers are always talking to one another about their love. Friends hardly even about their friendship. Lovers are normally face-to-face, absorbed in each other. Friends side by side, absorbed in some common interest. You see, it's a common interest that connects them together. In each of my friends, he says, there is something that only some other friend can fully bring out. By myself, I'm not large enough to call the whole man into activity. Indeed, in a coterie of friends that you can have, the friendships that you have bring different aspects of you out. And so you become a different kind of person with a different person. And when that person dies, that thing that they evoked in you uniquely also dies with that person. When my father passed away, there were certain ways or responses and experiences I had no one else can evoke. So part of me died, that part of me. Does that make sense? That you can see how we can all see that we can be layered by people, and then when they're gone, we lose that. Now I see heaven as the great, not only relayering, but also new relationships, millions of people you haven't even seen, with whom you'll have a greater and more intimate relationship, even with the people you know best right now, which is a lovely thought. But he says, true friendship is the least jealous of the loves. Two friends delight to be joined by a third and three by a fourth. It's not something that can't be shared. It's something that can be shared. And it enriches the dynamic. And so each group of friends, we add one, say there were four people there and another one adds. It changes the chemistry, doesn't it? The dynamics. I was just at the celebration of my friend Len Sykes' 80th birthday. It was a complete surprise. He didn't expect it. It was at a Red Lobster where he meets this guy for discipleship. It's a one-on-one. So he had no suspicion that it would be a plan for him to meet some of the people that were closest to him in his journey of righteousness. And so we met, and there were 6 of us all together celebrating the life of this man, a life well lived. And in doing so, it formed a unique connection with some of these people I knew, but not very well, but it amazingly forged a connection because we loved the same things. It was an astonishment to see how rapidly it put together. In fact, we're following up now with some of these people whom I knew, but now I know in a different level. So friendship is a powerful thing. It's not jealous, it shares and brings out a reality that others do not. He goes on to speak about friendship when it can rise out of mere companionship, when 2 or more of the companions discover that they have in common some insight or interest or even taste to which others do not share. And I have a spectrum of friendship. This is where I wish I had connected. Where I go on the left side from a casual contact kind of a person. I wouldn't really call that a friend. Many of the people call friends are what I would call acquaintances. You see, I don't think very many people have, especially men, rich friendships in that way. You go from a casual or contact to a companion. At least you're connected together in some activity. And maybe then another level, a colleague. There's a collegiality. But then you can become a comrade. You see my alliteration here. But the highest form is covenant. the highest relationship, and you can only have a small, blessed is a person who has one or more covenant friends, where you know that that person will always be there for you, and it transcends geography. It transcends everything. There are people, a covenant brother or sister, someone in your life like that is someone you could call at 3 a.m, and they would take the next flight to see you if you needed them. You see that? There would not even be any question about it. So given that idea, there are certain relationships that you have, and it requires time, doesn't it, to continue to make it go. It requires intention. It requires a measure of risk and vulnerability in a deep, rich relationship, doesn't it? There's a measure of risk. And there's bearing the weight of love, both the benefits of love, but also the sorrows of love, especially when another person declines. And so there's a lot of different components that relate to this. It's not a simple thing at all. But we go on to continue with this material. That he says, the typical expression of opening friendship would be something like this. What? You too? I thought I was the only one. You see? What he says is, do you care? You care about the same truth. And that's a remarkable thing. And it could be something very minor or something very significant, but it's got to be about something. A friendship must be about something, even if we're only in enthusiasm, as he says, for dominoes or white rice, or white mice, rather. White mice. It's a very strange friendship built upon. I've seen stranger things, though. People whose friendship is because of the beauty of flowers, so botanical, whatever. But we picture lovers face to face, but friends side by side. Their eyes look ahead at the same truth. And so it's a very deep kind of a relationship that he describes. And friendship is utterly free from affections need to be needed. It's not a need love in that respect. It's actually a gratuitous thing that's not necessary on an instinctual basis or for survival. It's something that's thrown up higher. It's more has a likeness to God by resemblance in its very nature. The mark of perfect friendship is not that help will be given when the pinch comes. Of course it will. But that having been given, it makes no difference at all. One's not obligated now for the other person. It's not a tit-for-tat, a kind of a quid pro quo relationship at all. You don't keep accounts, but you just continue to give. And in giving, you're serving yourself because at the same time, there's a reciprocal relationship that is built on this relationship of us. So friendship, unlike eros, is uninquisitive. It doesn't deal with these matters of. It's more a matter of not always talking about itself, but talking about the thing that we share together, is if you see the concept. And so he says it has no survival value. Rather, it is one of those things which give value to survival. So you can see the obvious difference there. Lewis goes on to say, and it's a long chapter, he gives this wonderful description of his own loves and his own friendship, and he invites us into an evening with his friends. He says, those are the golden sessions. When 4 or 5 of us, after a hard day's walking, I love that, walking with her friends. That's a nice thing right there, a walking tour with friends. And he would do this often, not just by himself, but also and it was a lovely area, of course, in which one could do that. But he says, those are the golden sessions when 4 or 5 of us, after a hard day's walking, have come to our inn, when our slippers are on, our feet spread out towards the blaze, and our drinks at our elbows. Nice image, isn't it? When the whole world and something beyond the world opens itself to our minds as we talk. And no one has any claim on or any responsibility for another, but all are freemen and equals, as if we had first met an hour ago, while at the same time, an affection mellowed by the years enfolds us. Life, natural life, has no better gift to give. Who could have deserved it? Isn't that a lovely description? You see, here's a man who knew what that was like, of having fellowship with people and having, you can just imagine them having their drinks at their arms there, and their pipes and or whatever. The thing about that is it would be an affection, but it's born out of that friendship, that intimate connection together, and talking about ideas and not having an agenda and just going on and ideating together, and each person adding another thing. It's like a kind of the jazz again of connecting things together. Remember, jazz, it rewards individual excellence, but it requires, it demands selfless collaboration. So it does reward the individual, but there's a collective collaboration, and the loss of that self, you see, where you deny yourself and enjoy the others, and then there's a relationship that emerges from that. So he speaks, though, of the fact that there, in his culture especially, now it's less so now, I think, but in his culture in particular, there would be some contexts, but not as many, I think, as we have now, where men and women would work side by side. It wasn't as common then. Or where they would be in the mission field, or where they might be among authors and artists. There, you'll have friendship between the sexes being common, but it was not as common as it may be in our time. He says a world where all men and women had sufficient common ground for this relationship could also be comfortable. At present, however, we fall between two stools. The necessary common ground, the matrix, exists between the sexes in some groups, but not in others. And so, as a consequence, there's a diminishment, as he describes it. But he says men have learned to live among ideas, and they know about these other things. But the person who isn't in that circle, who hasn't had that experience or that background, then can not enter into the friendship, because as soon as they enter into the circle, the friendship ceases. They're not inside. But I like what he says. Even though, say a woman comes into this friendship circle of men, and she doesn't have the education or the background, as was very common at that time. Here's what I think a brilliant thing about Lewis that's really ahead of his time. Although she may not be able to speak those things or have that commonality, yet he says she may be quite as clever as the men whose evening she has spoiled. You see? Or cleverer, but she is not really interested in the same things nor mistress of the same methods. So what he's saying, it's not that one is inferior to another, but it's just the circumstances and the connectedness that is now prevails, which is, I think, in my view, very ahead of its time. This love, free from instinct, free from all duties, but those which love has freely assumed, must almost wholly free from jealousy, and free without quantification from the need to be needed, is eminently spiritual. He thinks of this as the most spiritual of the loves for that reason. So he's going to be speaking about several things, and again, one of the ideas of how there's a danger, a downside, a pull that can be a distortion, as I mentioned before. He's going to move into that now. When he speaks about the benefits in the early church, these little pockets of early Christians survived because they cared exclusively for the love of the brethren and stopped their ears to the opinion of the pagan society all around them. We would do well to stop our ears to the opinions of the pagan society around us and not stop listening so much that it becomes so granular that it defines us, but actually inclining ourselves to the things above, the things that matter, the things that are most important, and to contextualize our journey in that larger matrix. But you see, there's a sense, though, when you have a pocket of people, a group of friends like that, there is a sort of secession, even a kind of rebellion that he describes. So the dangers of friendships, it can be a school of virtue, as the ancients saw. But what they don't seem to have seen is that it can be a school of vice as well. How? It's ambivalent. It makes good men better and bad men worse. As you well know, people never do as much evil by themselves as they do when they're with others, or they can do with others. Nor, to the opposite, we don't do as good by ourselves as we do in the context of community, of loving community. You see, so the actual collective can amplify the thing, whether for good or for ill. So the very collective itself is itself a thing that can go one way or another. It's ambivalent. So as he says, it makes good men better and bad men worse. So being aware of the possible danger in these good relationships here. This love, like the other natural loves, has its congenital liability to a particular disease. The danger is that they can have a partial indifference or deafness to outside opinion, because they're focusing on these ideas of truth that really mean so much to them. And that can be justified and necessary, though it is. It may lead to a wholesale indifference or deafness. There's a danger. The habit of not giving a damn grows on a class. To discount the voice of the peasant where it really ought to be discounted makes it easier to discount his voice when he cries for justice or mercy. So there can be a dangerous sense of superiority of the inner ring, of those who belong and those who don't belong. And that is an easy thing that we can see, and that can lead to a total deafness to the outside. So then you have a coterie as it becomes a self-appointed aristocracy. And so there's a transition from individual humility to corporate pride, and it's an easy thing to do. Oh, we're part of that group, you see. And they even name themselves certain groups. So the souls, or whatever they call themselves. So friends are in danger of coming to regard themselves as an elite because they are already attached. They are inside, as it were. And so that's the danger. And I can see that. I've seen this. So we can detect the pride of friendship, whether Olympian, titanic, or merely vulgar, in many circles of friends. The common vision which first brought us together, though, may fade quite away. We shall become a coterie that exists for the sake of being a coterie, a little self-elected and therefore absurd aristocracy, basking in the moonshine of our collective self-approval. I like that line. He says, just because this is the most spiritual of the loves, the danger which besets it is spiritual too. What's the great danger of this? He says, friendship is even, if you like, angelic. But man needs to be triply protected by humility if he is to eat the bread of angels without risk. Because it's a very high thing, and I think he's right about this. It can be used and misused for wrong purposes. So like other natural loves, it's unable to save itself. And so the danger is that you must realize the pull is pride. The most spiritual of the sins has the most powerful of the downward pulls of that corporate or collective pride, that arrogance. And so as a result, you must invoke the divine protection if it hopes to remain sweet. Otherwise, it loses and goes bad on us. For a Christian, there are strictly speaking, no chances. A secret master of the ceremonies has been at work. Now he's talking about friendship, being free of all that. We think we've chosen our peers, but actually there was someone who may have chosen them for us, even if we thought we were choosing them. He speaks, this is where he comes up with that phrase, the invisible master of ceremonies, that I very much like. For a Christian, strictly speaking, no chances. A secret master of the ceremonies has been at work. Christ, who said to the disciples, "You have not chosen me, but I have chosen you," can truly say to every group of Christian friends, "You have not chosen one another, but I have chosen you for one another." Isn't that an interesting way to see that? The friendship is not a reward for our discrimination and good taste in finding one another out. It's the instrument by which God reveals to each the beauties of all the others. So it's a great image in my mind of how It is he we may dare to hope, who sometimes does, and always should preside. Let us not reckon without our host. And that is, I think, a good, wise word. I have a little extra material I want to add to it, and it's from my book, Conform to His Image. And it's on the section on what's called holistic spirituality. And there I look at relationships, I look at work, I look at parent-child relationships, the husband-wife relationships, and friendships, and society. And here are just a few thoughts I had on friendships. As I say, and conformed to his image, relatively few of us experience true friendship. There's a spectrum of intimacy that ranges from acquaintanceship to a companionship to untested friendship to the intimacy of established friendship. That's the kind of friendship that's tested by time and by fire. You know what I mean? Then you can see that we've all had some untested friendships, but then when time or fire comes up, then you discover who your real friends were. We've discovered we have a lot more fair weather friends than we'd like to think. And so it's a dangerous pull. But there's this idea of time and fire. What people call friends are more likely to be acquaintances or companions. It requires an intentional investment of valuable time and energy to cultivate and maintain special friendships. I've made myself open to and available to a wide array of people and have become deep and rich friends over the years. And so I'm filthy rich in relationships, and that's the grace of God in my life. But at the same time, there's a cost. The cost is availability. The cost is weeping when another weeps and rejoicing when another rejoices. You may rejoice when they rejoice, but you have to weep when they weep. And there is this time that's mandated and required for you so that the very good that you have has its price, its cost, to sustain that very good. As friendship develops, it's natural to begin on the level of facts, to move to the level of opinions, and then to reach the relationship, the level of feelings. This is where men talk more about facts than about feelings or relationships. But I think that they can develop that quality as they move along. So then here I wrote as another bullet, these are just a series of bullets, as C.S. Lewis in The Four Loves observes that friendship is the least natural of human loves, since it is not driven by instinct, necessity, or survival value. In addition, true friendship is the least jealous of the loves, and it's essentially free from the need to be needed. You just heard me say those things before, but I'm kind of summarizing that now. Another point, it's important that we learn to love people without being controlled or consumed by them. When dealing with people, it is wise to hope, but not to expect. Never center your whole faith on any human being. Only God can sustain that burden. And I think there's a danger of us succumbing to looking to other people as our source of provision when they may or may not be a means, but they're never the source. You're putting a freight, a burden, a weight upon them that only God can carry. So realize that they are not the source of your provision, or otherwise you'll be committed to manipulating them. But rather they're means by which God may or may not provide. And so there's no need for true quality friendships, he says, that I say. I'm now reading from Conform to His Image, so I shouldn't say he says. Quality friendships are characterized by trust, openness, mutual respect, honesty, and self-disclosure. And you stop and think about it, you really realize, looking back at your own experience, you can see, I can just pick a relationship and just sum them up. So I'm thinking about my friend Len Sykes because I happened to just mention his 80th birthday party, which we celebrated. So immediately I think of moments, if I go to this list, what are the times of trust, of openness, of mutual respect, honesty, and self-disclosure. A whole bunch of things just popped into my mind, especially one time when he rebuked me, and I didn't like it a bit. But faithful are the wounds of a friend, but deceitful are the kisses of an enemy. And it really had a big impact on me. So a whole thing, and these qualities are true of any of these relationships. Friendship is founded on sharing a basic consensus of beliefs. It's built on caring about the same truth. And then another point that I think is important that I added, true friendship is revealed in times of crisis. I alluded to this before. Times of adversity and distress test the reality of friendship. The idea of a friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity, Proverbs 17:17. So there are times, and you can think about what are the times of adversity that you've been summoned to equip and to empower and to encourage your friends at times of need. Another point I make is a real friend is empathetic. He or she rejoices with you and weeps with you. A false friend resents or is envious of another's good fortune and can secretly gloat at another's misfortune. It's an interesting thing. We're called to weep when others weep and rejoice when they rejoice. Sometimes we rejoice when they weep and weep when they rejoice. There's something wrong with that. I'll let you process that. But no, it can't be true, right? It couldn't be you. You know better. There's a danger. The heart is deceitful in so many ways. Who can understand it? But the highest level of friendship includes the dynamic of covenant and commitment. In this covenant relationship, two people agree to walk together for life in trust and loyalty. I give a couple scriptures for that. And I actually remember a couple moments when that sudden realization took place. Not always that way, but sometimes there are special moments when you realize that we've just become committed to one another, to watch after one another for life, which is a great thing. I love this quote by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. He's the author of Le Petit Prince, The Little Prince. And I love that book. I liked it so much when I read it when I was 16 years old. I still remember I was in Hackensack High School, and I came across this little. How many of you read it? The Little Prince. Not as many. You should all read it. It's a story. It's for adults, of course. It's a powerful and rich little story about the things that matter are invisible to the eyes. Very, very remarkable. Poetic. It's like a poetic story, is what it is. I was so enchanted by it that I wrote a libretto for an opera. And it was, I wish I had it, it rhymed. It was a beautiful thing, and it really turned out very well. I wrote it in my handwriting, and I remember the two different colors of ink I used for the various purposes. And it's one of those sad things that I lost. There's so many other things I have lost, especially when I went off to college. All my great treasures were thrown out because my sister came and moved in, and they must have pitched all my things. This was not a good thing. I'm not bitter. Lost my Lionel trains. I lost my chemistry sets. I had I had chemistry sets that were not just three drawers, three little panels. I had a 5-panel chemistry set. I mean, the best they ever made. They've had stuff that should never have been in there, including lithium. But things like this, I used to do experiments where I'd actually blow up Pyrex test tubes. That takes a lot to do. But all these, my Gilbert erector set and all these other things that I had, all my notes and everything, gone. And it's a great loss. But I wish I could somehow, of all the things I did, that may be the thing I'd most like to recover. What did it look like? Because I remember doing it. But this great portrait, this poet, put it this way about friendship. And it's as good a description of the benefits of friendship as I've ever read. Exupéry says, friends share the treasure of common memories, the treasure of common memories, of trials endured together, of quarrels and reconciliations and generous emotions. Let me read that again. I think it's a very lovely picture. And immediately I can think of a lot of people, a lot of relationships that summons up. He says, friends share the treasure of common memories. of trials endured together, of quarrels and reconciliations and generous emotions. One of the tests of friendship, when it's a tested friendship, it endures that. And when it survives, it's like being tempered like a steel. So it becomes more rich because it's gone through the shared furnace of affliction and adversity. And so it actually tempers you and makes you more solid as a result. They build mutual histories of joys and pains, is what we're talking about. And so I can think of, if a person comes to mind, I can think immediately of I'm thinking of several people right now, mutual histories, both of joys and of pains, of great gains and great losses. Spiritual friends believe in each other, they build into one another's lives, and they encourage each other to grow in their relationship with God. They're faithful, and they're willing to ask tough questions to keep one another honest. They sharpen, and I have a proverb for each of these, a text for each of these. They sharpen, counsel, encourage one another. They sharpen each other, they counsel, and they encourage. Those are good words. And a real friend rebukes when necessary and is candid and truthful. Lasting friendships keep confidences. They listen attentively and empathetically and do not seek to control or manipulate. What are your questions about friendship? Yes.
How would you classify, I've always admired the deep friendships that can occur among men who have served in military services.
That's right.
When they, in fact, would jump on an explosive
Mm-hmm.
to save their comrade.
Yes.
Those friendships seem to really last a lifetime. And it's, a bringing together of men, and now, of course, today women as well, but let's say just keep the men that are randomly put together in a unit. And it's just incredible, the depth of friendship. My father had such friends.
Yes.
In the Air Force.
Yes. I think that's often been the case for men. Sometimes their best friends of life are forged during times of military service, and where they're thrown together, but then there's a connectedness that takes place. I have a feeling that that was true of my father. I still see photos of him when he was in the Army Air Corps in the Second World War. He was a B-29 trainer, a pilot trainer. And his crew knew the people who went off on the Enola Gay, by the way. It was the same kind of plane, but they weren't the ones chosen. But I think that may have been his highlight, his best times. Because there's something together. I think about C.S. Lewis and Patty Moore. Patty Moore was a friend that he knew in France, and they were during the First World War. And they became so close that they made a covenant. If one of us is killed, the other will take care of the other's parent. Patty Moore died, and C.S. Lewis inherited Mrs. Moore and her child, and it was not a good thing. He almost wrote with a kind of a lilt in his step after she died. Yes, Steve. Tolkien, right? Yeah. Yes. Yeah, it's amazing. For about 40 years. In the essentials, unity, in the non-essentials, liberty, and all things charity, and they lived that out. And it is incorrect to say that there was this rift that Humphrey Carpenter, I think it was a fellow who wrote this book on Lewis, and it was really an inaccurate perspective. It was also inaccurate. While Tolkien wasn't wild about the Narniad, the 7 books in the Chronicles of Narnia, that didn't hurt their friendship or anything like that. He didn't care for it as much. But he raved about the Ransom trilogy, about Out of the Silent Planet and Paralandra and That Hideous Strength. Tolkien did appreciate that. So they had little differences, but they had greater connections, and you're absolutely right about this. And it was Tolkien, I think, who recommended, it was Lewis who recommended before he died Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings as for the Nobel Prize, and he won it. But it was Lewis's testimony, and that was just really not long before his death that happened. A letter was found pretty recently that was discovered about that. So it's connections. Yeah, people misconstrue these things. It's almost like they want them to have a bad time. There's something strange about us. How does it that we gloat on the pains of others? It's almost a parasitic device whereby, and that's why you have reality TV, so-called. That's why you have hoarders, and you have storage wars and all these idiotic things, because I'm surprised they don't have one called trailer trash. I mean, I'm surprised, because it'd get a good audience, because people somehow feed. My life's not so great, but certainly not as bad as them, so it makes them feel better about themselves. There's a kind of a parasitical relationship that goes on that's not pretty. Any other? Sally? Yeah? Okay, next week. Yes, Bob.
Is it possible for 2 non-believers to have a covenant friendship or relationship?
Oh, I think non-believers can have a covenant relationship, yeah. It's not as what it could be, but there's no question about it. There are strong such relationships that have been seen throughout the course of history, where they would do anything for one another, and geography didn't separate them or anything like that. I think so. But the potential of a covenant relationship when the spiritual is added was only even richer. So, as I see it. Well, we're out of time. Let's just close in a prayer. Father, we thank you that you've called us to be your friends. We are no longer slaves, but you've called us friends, because all things that you've revealed have been made known to us. And so, as your friends, but also as your children, as also your bride, we see these brilliant and wonderful metaphors that reveal the richness of our relationship with the triune Spirit who rules and holds all things together, in whose name we pray. Amen.